Test, 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 test. Test, test, test. It's 7:46, time check. Just wanted to do a simple thing if I could. Maybe this is Scott Eustis, Community Science Director, HealthyGulf, 17 February 2020, and I just wanted to lead you through a tour of the coast to try to explain the long history of re-deltaing the coast, restoring the river, why sediment diversions are a particular thing that GRN supports most of the time. When we don't support them, I want to be clear about that. There's freshwater diversions. I'm going to call them oyster diversions because there you go. And then there are also freshwater pumps that are really drainage features, or they're not really they weren't intended as restorative features. And those have had particular problems, particularly the assimilation plants. And we want to point out what the difference between that is and what's going on. There's also a lot of outfall management that's happened and been evaluated and reevaluated. In almost all of these projects have had some kind of outfall management, and it makes a lot of difference. And again, some of these things are pipelines that weren't intended to be sediment diversions, or they weren't intended to be impoundments or outfall management. It's just how the coast flows. So it gets really confusing. So, and I made some notes on backfilling as well, but I don't know if it's part of the tour. This is an experiment. So we're going to start. And a lot of this was inspired by Gene Turner saying that sediment diversions will flood out marshes. Well, yes, if the Corps was in charge of them, they would. But luckily, the Corps is not in charge of them. And CPRA has spent 5 years at least doing a lot of modeling about them that we'll get into. But this idea that water being put into the marshes, floods out the marshes, there are some good examples. The big one here, that's a cause of every academic fight at LSU, it seems, is the Hammond wastewater assimilation. The water flows from the blue pipe into the marshes, and in 2008, all these marshes disappeared. The soil layer was just bubbling away into the atmosphere. So I think this is a place where, yes, the water has flooded the marshes. Oh, are we doing a tour? Yeah, it's a linear feature. I'll have to update this, but the water pours out of the pipe. You can actually see the photo of the platform to the right of the blue line, and that water just 24/7, 365 floods these marshes. There's no change as long as people are flushing toilets. These things are going. So, yeah, it was definitely a thing that led to the turning of these freshwater marshes, which were Taifa, into open water, and now it's filling back in with, say, cut grass. I'm going to go to the next thing. We'll go to the next one. So, I agree with Gene that the freshwater is flooding the marshes there. John Day is involved in that project as a he got paid to do that. So his academic opinions, I think, are compromised. But I think John Day would agree with me in this case, where here we have the St. Bernard pumping station, one of the drainage pumps, that seems to be maintaining cypress trees close to the pump in the central wetlands. But then there's this weird semicircle of marshes that are missing. And this is a central wetlands. The water doesn't flow very well here. It's kind of impounded. There's not clear drainage. We've got some pipeline canals as well. There's not a clear connection to Bayou Dupre or the Violet Canal. So maybe if there were, and the water could drain, it wouldn't flood out so much. But we have this weird place where I think the water is piling up, stacking up, and flooding out the marshes. But again, that's not a sediment diversion. That's just a stormwater drainage feature. Okay, now I'm not doing the tour at all. We're just clicking. Here's Carnarvon, litigated, controversial. Everyone's sick of it. Lake Pontchartrain Basin really likes to crow about this delta that's built by Carnarvon, and Gene Turner was critical of this as land that was sustained. First of all, you can see all the hurricane damage, these big scour features that are, you really see them at the large scale. But also, you can also see that there's not a lot of water from the sediment. There's not a lot of water from the oyster diversion making it into the scour holes, and that's on purpose because Delcro Lands is maintaining the water. They want the water. And it's in their management plan that they want to maintain the spoil banks of the canals in order to restrict access and to preserve submersed vegetation, which, as a big fan of submersed vegetation, this is the only place where we have I think in Louisiana where we're actively maintaining seagrass. Fascinating concept. Against the master plan, probably. But also, you can see how, this diversion was not engineered to move sediment. It was engineered to move water. So we don't really expect it to build land is the other thing. And then in the orange area, we have a marsh management plan that's explicitly saying we're not going to build land. We need to maintain seagrass beds. So, Gene used Landsat data of this area to say that sediment diversions don't work. But one, this was an oyster diversion. It was engineered not to move sediment. So this little bit that Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation is very proud of happens, it's kind of a side effect rather than the intended effect. And, if we're saying that, well, this diversion didn't help these lands, well, it's because there's no sheet flow. You can see that the water that's Mocha is coming through the channel and going right into Lake Leary. It's not being distributed throughout the marshes in question. So, that publication that Gene wrote examining this area could have, referenced the management plan, which is to explicitly states to not build land. Here's another oyster diversion. Again, this is a feature placed on the river in a particular place in the Thowel Leg. You can see the sandbar where they have the sand mining is across the way. So this is the shallow part of the river, and this is the deep part of the river. Oyster diversions were placed on the deep part of the river to minimize the amount of sediment flowing through them. So it's just by happenstance that this area has been rebuilt with the sediment coming through Davis Pond. And you can see, that there's sediment flowing in a certain way. This sediment has been building land in this area. It has been strengthening the bulk density of soils in this area, this light green area. This was all new land in the dark green area. You know, we still have, the remnant ponding from a long time ago, you know, associated with some of these pipelines. There could be outfall management to try to get some of this sediment into the ponding area, but we might just be flooding out more marshes if we tried to make a little channel. So we definitely need to degrade this spoil bank, open things up, and maybe cause some suction to cause sediment to flow through here. That would improve this. But again, the point of this engineering, the reason this channel was placed here, was not to do any of this. It was to try to regulate salinities here. And that was the thinking in the year 2000. And by the year 2010, everyone realized that that was a fool's errand. It's almost impossible to regulate salinity using Davis Pond. But, you can rebuild land here. And there were benefits adjacent to the Delta, but also in 2010, the U.S. Forest Service said that the cypress trees in Jean Lafitte Park benefited from the massive opening of the diversion in 2010. Note that, so maybe the trees here benefited, but we still have massive hydrological issues with spoil banks in Ile de Barataria, etc., where the spoil banks are causing ponding to open up. The lack of drainage causes waterlogging and the loss of land. And even though that diversion is restoring a little bit of the river, it's not really anything to affect things in this second tier. All right, so what are some other examples of what we call sediment diversions? Let's move down the river where there's no river levee. Where in 2001, we had a crevasse open up at Mardi Gras Pass. 2012 Mardi Gras Day. And this is where CPRA had been planning to place a sediment diversion. It no longer is going to do that because 4 was too many and they're moving to 2. And the benefits of this one go away faster. But we've had 8 years of crevasse building and sediment deposition here. And it's led to about $1 billion of different land restoration. In this past flood, this canal ruptured, and this ponding caused by the oil canal is being fixed by the sediment diversion. There's lots of little bank lines that are emerging that are brand new. These sand spits are brand new. You go here and there's lots of spoonbills. There's tons of birds and fish and alligators. It's a thriving place. It's very encouraging. It could be improved. There's no official project for this, even though it's saving the state probably about $1 billion in different, rather than pumping, it just lets this thing build the land. And maybe they'll shut it off eventually if they put the other ones online to make the other ones more effective. But in the meantime, people are concerned about sediment flowing into American Bay here. I think you could do a little bit of outfall management, some terraces for very little money, and try to keep the sediment on the left side of the terraces and keep it from going to the right side. You don't want to impound things, but it doesn't take but maybe a 30% reduction in flow to cause the sand and the sediment to drop out on the left side, which will, make fishermen on the right side more happy. And you can see also this canal here is also a plume. So I might add another, we could build terraces in here for a similar reason, even though this is a navigation feature. So there's tugs in and out of here. So you'd want to, but if you just restricted the flow a little more, you could get some good marsh nourishment, land building in this area. Some more wild crevasses, I guess, is the wild Carencrow Delta. This may have been a project, but it could be improved. You know, we've got a lot of land building just coming out of the river. There's a little bit of flow restriction by these remnant islands. So you can see how just slowing this down creates enough of a platform for the seagrass to colonize. So, you know, if we put just a couple more of those, you could get a lot more regular delta formation here, and maybe reduce sedimentation complaints for this nav channel over here, or other sedimentation complaints. Here's a project where some of these improvements were done. This is the BS11. So this line here, this was a crevasse channel dredged through these marshes here. Boom, that was the project right there. This was not part of the project. No manipulation was done. These lines were terraces created to back up the flow and deposit the sediment, and it's been wildly successful. To the point where people were thinking that this was probably too many terraces. We didn't need all these terraces. We probably could have done half of them and had this much sediment deposition fall out. Notice that it's not completely impounded. And I should mention, this used to be marsh, then oil and gas spilled or did something and it turned into open water. And now this restoration project has returned it to marsh and seagrass, fresh water. So this has worked pretty effectively. I'll note it also has a drainage. So the water can pile up and deposit sediment, but it also has a way to get out. And you can see that, you know, there's less sediment in this plume emerging from this channel, this pipeline channel, than from its neighbor, which is just creating huge spits. And you can see that same sedimentation process without the terraces isn't as effective. So here's, you know, you can compare this crevasse to BS11. There's a lot of the same conditions from the river. It's building out a delta. Same with over here, building out a delta. But you can see from the seagrass that a lot of it is still, you know, 6 to a foot underwater. Whereas if you put the terraces, we get emergent land. And so this probably will stay underwater until all of this Bay Denise fills in with sediment. With some outfall management, you can control where the land is built and make navigation and other things more predictable. Again, here's a place where it could be improved. You can see from the dark colors that a lot of the sediment is not reaching this area. So if you think that is beneficial, you could probably dredge out a bayou or so to cause some of that silt to start to fill up this area. If you thought that was worth the time and the monetary investment. The big one is West Bay, 3 square miles built with the river, and that's the dark green on the left. And then, you know, people will talk and say that West Bay is a dredging project. It is marsh creation, and this is the marsh creation area, which is, you know, land that is, it's not really marshland, it's pasture land. There are cows graze on this, whereas this is more of your classic freshwater marsh delta that's building from West Bay. So immensely successful. So many birds and fish in this area. This is hard sand. You can get out, and I've walked on this this sand spit. It's you could build a house on it. Similarly, this, I should note that West Bay is very open, so it's a big crevasse. It's moving lots of sediment. There were shreds put in to improve the land building in 2013, and so the land you see there, 3 square miles, has been built since 2013. Pretty big deal. This sediment diversion is a bit more impounded, but there's still an outfall. This is Buoy Pond, there's no more pond in Buoy Pond. This was built as a mitigation for a oil spill by the Chevron company in the U.S. Fish National Refuge. So U.S. Fish made them build a diversion with outfall management, and you notice there is some drainage. So this light green, this whole thing used to be a pond, right? And with these kind of cross flow terraces, it's captured the sediment coming out of this crevasse channel and replaced marshes that were taken away from us by Chevron. So go Clean Water Act, and thank you, U.S. Fish, for suing Chevron. This one's interesting because we have, you can see other places where, again, if you wanted to keep it seagrass and keep it water, you wouldn't have done this. This still has a healthy amount of seagrass. I've been to this place by airboat. There's just fish jumping and birds flying everywhere. It's ridiculous. It's National Geographic. There's also hogs, of course, as well. I think the main point is that the flooding of this area hasn't caused the loss of marshes, and it hasn't caused that water. You don't see the waterlogging pattern in any of these. So the Mid-Barataria is the new one and the biggest one that has ever been engineered, and it's not an oyster diversion, it's a sediment diversion. It's being proposed for the old St. Rosalie plantation, or just south of the old St. Rosalie settlement, south of the Alliance Refinery, north of Ironton, historic Freedmen's Bureau town, north of the town of Myrtle Grove, across the river from the town of Phoenix. It would be a channel placed here because this is the shallow part of the river. The other side is the Thalweg, the other side is the deep part of the river. And there would be a channel through this pasture land into the Lafitte oil field, which was a Chevron Texaco oil field, which is the reason we don't have marshes here anymore. This went through a lot of planning and changes. It used to be the Myrtle Grove medium diversion, and medium was 75,000. It's been reduced to 50,000 because there are a lot of concerns with putting a lot of water into the estuary, particularly for fisheries impacts. So it's been reduced in order to mitigate those impacts. It's had an operational plan so that you could build the most land without moving a lot of water. So there is a concern that massive amount of water will flood out the existing marshes. And I would think if you're concerned about that, I think you'd be concerned about a halo just like we saw from the the pump. And when the Corps did it and didn't change the operational plan, they did flood out these marshes. You can see this is the, where is this? It's not the Barataria waterway, but it's the Myrtle Grove channel out of Myrtle Grove. Everyone's been in a boat past these camps. These marshes are deteriorating from waterlogging already. And to me, this is very much an impact of sea level rise. That these marshes, which don't have a lot of, they're not sustained by the river, but there's not a lot of pipelines or oil fields around them either. Well, take it back, there's a little. But you know, a lot of this, there's a systemic pattern of the marshes disintegrating from the inside out. And although there are some oil features, it's not nearly as much, they're not nearly as clear as, say, you know, the area right north of Grand Bayou, which is, I think, the Diamond oil field. I mean, this is clearly oil and gas liability. So we already have marshes that are flooded too much right here. So we might be concerned that, you know, the Mid-Barataria sediment diversion is going to, you know, it'll pile up sediment here in the actual old oil field itself. I think everyone's agreed on that. And there's going to be a net land building in this area. But I guess people are then concerned, well, what about this? You know, here's an area that's still relatively intact next to things that are disintegrating already. You know, is the force of water going to cause land loss in this area? And then at what time period? I think time period is the thing. Maybe in the short term, there would be some deterioration from flooding, but the state is going to evaluate the project over 50 years. So you might see a transition from the intermediate marsh that exists there into a fresh marsh. But will this project cause flooding? There was a concern in the original modeling when it was 75,000 that it would flood Lafitte if it were done under pulsed operation. So this pipeline platform, basically, for the, sorry, my drawing is bad, but you can kind of see where they laid the sediment pipeline to move sediment from the river out into the old oil field. They created a permanent path, permanent footprint for the pipeline in case they build it again. So they can easily get piped sediment into this part of the, into Lafourche Parish. But it also serves as a ridge to try to mitigate the concerns that this sediment diversion would put a lot of water and put a foot of water in Lafitte. There are also these concerns about, you know, these marshes that are already waterlogged. Is the additional sediment going to sustain them, or is it going to deteriorate them? I think the example from Davis Pond shows that it's going to sustain them. But maybe I'm wrong. And I think the engineers at CPRA did agree, and these aren't the exact paths, but they seem to think that the sediment deposition would occur around here, but it could be assisted by allowing water to flow more efficiently through the Barataria waterway and some of the smaller bayous that go into the deeper Barataria Bay. Yeah, it's hard to see, but this is actually the deeper part. Bayou Saint Denis is, or is it Bayou Saint Denis? Bayou Saint Denis is really kind of the drain on this area. So putting these, making these little channels, and there are more than this, into the marsh features to move water more efficiently into the deeper Barataria Bay is an addition made to the project after some of these concerns about, creating a halo, building land here, but affecting marshes negatively here. So it is believed that these drainage features will assist with that. So in regards to Grand Bayou, I haven't seen concerns about 3 feet of water in Grand Bayou. There have been, I think there's some modeling by Moffett and Nickel for this being a 300,000 CFS. Yeah, that's right. 300,000 CFS structure. So if we made this the Monte Carry, we could put that much water on Grand Bayou. 3 to 5 feet, I think. That is not in the cards anymore. That was a proposal that was considered in 2012, and now is not. I think a lot of it, and then when you look at some of the maps for how much the water level raises, this ridge, which is Grand Bayou itself, does provide some kind of, it's a hydrologic barrier between the water that would be flowing through these marshes and the Grand Bayou community. So, I haven't heard the concerns from the community, but if we're concerned about flooding, I know there are some efficient pathways into the community that we can then make less efficient. Should we have a control structure, a couple of weirs to force the slowdown of water, to kind of buffer the energies flowing through the system, if that's a concern? And again, for 50,000 cubic feet per second, I don't know that it's as much of a concern, but that's the kind of thing I would want to talk to the community about. This project has been amended many times, and that's the kind of amendment that would be pretty trivial to implement, in my opinion. This whole area needs help, I think, and I think that it's probably some of the most vulnerable in the next 20 years to just disappearing completely. If we do nothing, it's going to go away, and there are no plans to do marsh creation in this area. It's tended to be too expensive. It's also not an area that's been destroyed by the oil and gas extraction, so it's not part of the oil and gas lawsuits. So this area, and forgive me, I've boated in this area quite a bit, fished it. What are we're not doing anything. There's no plan for this area except for sustaining it with the sediment diversion. So, if we don't do the sediment diversion, it just seems like we're writing this whole area in light red off. So that to me is kind of unconscionable. Although I understand all of the conflicts. And I'm sure someone say, well, you just dredged material from the river. Well, a lot of this I think would benefit from the fine silts that you can't place with dredging. And I think this is on the agenda for being assisted a little bit by the diversion. And this might be the new barrier islands here. This might be the line in the sand, but clearly the only hope is that the sediment diversion can help sustain some of these marshes that are already disintegrating from sea level rise. But of course, if you put, even though it's a sediment diversion and it's been designed to move sediment with the least amount of water possible, you're still going to have to open these gates, and let the flow through probably for about 2 weeks out of the year during the rising stage of the river, not the flood stage. The rising stage of the river has the sand. So opening it during the rising stage helps move sand out of the river, which helps saves your shipping channel dredging costs, but also move some of the harder material into the bayside. So the plan for that pulsed operation, where it would only be open for weeks out of the year, would freshen a much larger area than the sediment would drop out in. It would freshen, down into the northern parts of the old Barataria Bay. So there is a legit question, like, if Bay Sambois is oyster grounds right now, and it's oyster leases that the Grand Bayou community relies on, do those pulses affect oyster production? And I guess another question is, do we trust the state to abide by that operations plan? For the second question, yeah, I'm wary of the state too. For the first question, we can model, how the oyster grounds are affected. I think Bay Sambois is not nearly as affected as some of these other places in terms of salinity changes. I'm thinking about dolphins and how I always see dolphins in Lake Hermitage, which is a bit unnatural, seeing that this is freshwater here. It's not historical that dolphins use this pass, but we have a lot of sick dolphins in these marshes, and this habitat here will probably start to go away if we begin flushing fresh water through the system. Even if it's not lethal for oysters in Bay Sambois, is it going to lower the optimal salinity? Are there, changes in production? These are totally legit questions. And again, maybe there's benefits in doing some freshwater control structures. Maybe there's benefit in strategically building marshes. I think or salinity deflection is something that's been proposed for the dolphins, where, since most of the benefits land-wise of the sediment diversion are going to be realized here, and we've got terraces coming, we've got drainage improvements coming to make sure we don't flood any marshes out. Could we mitigate salinity changes by doing strategic marsh creation on what used to be, the shoreline of of Lafourche Parish, which hardly exists anymore? It's in terrible shape. But could these marshes be strategically restored? I think, is this Indian Bayou? This old settlement, historic area probably has some middens and oil wells. Could this area be, we can't afford to restore all of this, but could we create a shoreline, again, to make sure that the fresh water coming from the sediment diversion flows into the deep part of Barataria Bay, where it can do a lot of good mixing. It can benefit oyster grounds by deferring the oyster drill and salinities that are too high. It can benefit oyster grounds by adding alkalinity into the brackish waters, so that the young seed and spat oysters can grow shells in an era where we have ocean acidification happening. Can we maximize the benefits of that fresh water while minimizing the impact to the oysters? Maybe we can't. There's certainly places where, HealthyGulf, we just advocate buyouts and moving people. It's already happened in some places. And really I'm talking about oysters here. Because they're, as a sessile organism, it's harder to make compromises. You can't, even though we can move them, and we do, and moving them is actually part of the farming of the oysters. There might be an argument, there is an argument that if we have any oyster leases here in this lake, which I've never really seen going on, I'm trying to think of where I've seen oystering. But if there's an oyster lease in this area, it's probably not going to be viable after this project is implemented. Little Lake, although it doesn't receive a lot of the benefits of the sediment additions from the sediment diversion, Little Lake has some public oystering grounds. Those oyster grounds probably are not going to be viable after the implementation of the project. So what do? We're going to have to find new public grounds, which is a process that is happening on the east bank of the river, where Wildlife and Fisheries is designating new public oyster grounds for the seed oysters, for the spat oysters to grow into seed. And so I think that there's ample opportunity to mitigate some of the freshwater and saltwater mixing concerns. But if you don't believe that the state cares at all about those things, I can understand how you just hate the whole project, because there are going to be big changes. But in the face of sea level rise, we need big changes. Okay. Where does HealthyGulf oppose sediment diversions? This is an hour. So here's Wax Lake Outlet. This is an accidental land feature west of the Atchafalaya River, built, I think, in order to facilitate shipping and take the flood pressures off of the levees around Morgan City. This is where the river wants to flip. And so in geologic time, or as the core loses control of the river, this is where the main channel of the Mississippi wants to go. So if we want to build land with the Mississippi River, we need to build a sediment diversion now. Otherwise, New Orleans is done. Which means the state of Louisiana is done, really. Sorry, Baton Rouge. But we want the sediment to make it to Wax Lake Outlet is the point. And CPRA does too. And so CPRA is against diverting sediment, say, into Wax Lake. Here is a freshwater lake. It's filling in because of different sediment deposition. It's coming through the Atchafalaya Basin. And CPRA also is concerned about navigation in Morgan City. There's a lot of fluffy material. Barges can't get in and out. We've got a huge industrial port in, I think, is it Amelia? And then South Morgan City as well. And those are tremendous oil and gas waste pits. Those are disgusting. But there's large navigation concerns in Morgan City as well, that the Atchafalaya River is silting in right here. So CPRA wants to create almost a sediment trap in the flat lake project, dredge it, and then the sediment that would have silted in the nav channel can fall out here, and then we can then dredge this and place it out in the bay where it does good. We agree very much with this project. It seems awesome. I think at HealthyGulf, we let's see, we need to move this up the river. Here's a place where Enterprise Pipeline has artificially created a sediment diversion on the Atchafalaya River, and it's filling Grand Lake. You can see how the sediment's flowing down Grand Lake, it's flowing down the river, but then this pipeline channel creates a block of water flow. So these swamps go hypoxic, they can no longer drain. These swamps end up getting a lot of sediment deposited into them, and they turn to ash. That is to say, they turn into bottomland hardwood. They turn into deer leases instead of fishing areas. So these are large environmental changes that we think Enterprise is liable for. Also, there's a little bit here, Enterprise is filling in Grand Lake and blocking the flow of water, which is unpermitted. And, when I was out here on the boat, the sediment plume almost blocked all of this part of Grand Lake. So you'd get blockage, you'd get stagnant water, you'd lose fisheries. So, this is a case where the pipeline is both the impoundment and it's the diversion. So this is a place where HealthyGulf opposes diverting sediment to change the environment. One, because if we just left it in the river channel, it would build wax lake. And two, when we deposit it in these swamps, it causes lots of water quality issues and impedes navigation. And it changes vegetation away from swamp, which we are in danger of losing. So again, if CPRA wanted to do a project to deepen Grand Lake, we would be in favor. We could create a sediment trap here. We could create a sediment trap here on the Atchafalaya River, and use that to create land in Wax Lake. We could use this sediment and intervene here so that Morgan City isn't filled in. And lastly, I think we have concerns even further up than Grand Lake. There are massive sediment diversions into the swamp as far north of Bayou Sorrel. There are many pipelines through the Bayou Sorrel area, but this cut that was made by the Corps for water quality is a very efficient conduit of sediment into the swamps and is changing the swamps from cypress tupelo to ash and other hardwood. And it's also blocking the drainage of these swamps, which are hypoxic. So we have bad water, we lose the fisheries, we lose the crawfish. And it's because of all this sediment deposition. There was this is called the Grand Lake Management Unit, just to confuse you, or the East Grand Lake. It is the Northern Grand Lake. But this is Bayou Sorrel here. This is Lake Zadric here. This is the Florida Gas Pipeline impoundment there. And then the Bayou Bridge is a new impoundment along the Williams Canal in the south part of the East Grand Lake unit. The original management plan was to knock out the sediment depositing effects of the Florida gas pipeline, because the Florida gas pipeline diverts sediment from this channel across the basin and impounds this area, causing a lack of oxygen. Also, the Williams Canal and now the Bayou Bridge Pipeline Canal does the same in this place. And originally, as part of the East Grand Lake project, there were going to be spoil banks on the Williams Canal. Well, there are going to be breaks in the spoil bank on the Williams Canal. We see with the construction of the pipeline that even formerly connected parts of the swamp are no longer connected, as the construction has happened and the soil has been compressed. Basically, a new dam has been built. So if you think of Bayou Sorrel as a very efficient sediment diversion, and then the School Board Canal, which is also very cocoa, right? There's 13 feet of deposition in this area, and it's changing the forests radically. You can kind of see the delta formation through the trees. And what's more, just as with sediment diversions, we have outfall management and terraces sometimes. This Bayou Bridge pipeline dam is going to back up that water even further and cause even more and higher deposition in the School Board Canal area. It also blocks the flow, so we just get bad water, hypoxic water in the summer. So, there's an urgent need to put a weir on Bayou Sorrel to keep that sediment in the main river channel and to stop it from causing these issues as it enters the East Grand Lake Management Unit. And there's a need to, as is required by the pipeline permits, to make sure that water is flowing north to south. I think this is B Bayou, for example. You can see how there's just no bayou left, and the construction of the pipeline has kind of ensured that there is no flow of water through B Bayou. This is basically a road that's been built. Here's success. We were able to get a horizontal drill in some parts of the pipeline, so water is flowing there. That's good. We were able to change the permit and get some of the lakes preserved, but in general, there's supposed to be gaps every 500 feet along this road, and there are not gaps every 500 feet. Same thing with Florida gas pipeline. There's supposed to be gaps every 500 feet along the pipeline right of way. Instead, the pipeline right of way is efficiently conveying sediment from the channel across the thing, basically making a dam and basically impounding the swamp. So we oppose these unintentional sediment diversion features. Well, I think Basin Keeper would argue that they are intentional, but that's a story for another time. At least on paper, this sediment is doing maximum damage. It couldn't be shaped in a worse pattern. We desperately need it to be stopped before it enters these deep swamps, and we need it to keep traveling down the river to get to the coast. So here's, Do the sediment diversions work? Yes. Do they flood out marshes? Probably not. Are there places where we oppose sediment diversions? Definitely. So that's been your tour. Thanks for joining me in this experiment, and I'll see you soon.